listener production.
Hello, happy Friday and welcome to The Briefing. I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. This weekend's looking like it's going to be a bit of a scorcher in quite a few spots around the country, and naturally you might be thinking of heading down to the beach to cool off. But in light of a recent spate of shark bites, is that a good idea?
There's no silver bullet that's going to say this will protect you from a shark bite. You will never have 100% protection at the beach. It's just impossible.
That chat coming up in the second half of this episode. But first, it is time for the headlines with Chris Spiru. It is Friday, the 14th of March.
Morning, Sash. Morning, everybody. Happy Friday and 1 month until my birthday. Just putting that little reminder out there for all of you. Let's start today in Russia, where Vladimir Putin has responded to the US's ceasefire proposal with Ukraine, saying he agrees with it in principle, but questions remain. The world has been waiting on the Russian president to offer his thoughts on the 30-day deal, which would see an immediate pause to all land, sea and air activities. At a press conference in Moscow, Putin said, "The idea itself is correct and we certainly support it, but there are issues that need to be discussed, and I think those need to be discussed with our American colleagues and partners." One of those key issues being the origins of the war.
So that means no ceasefire for now, with Russia pushing the ball back into America and Ukraine's court. It is worth noting, though, that could change quickly. Donald Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, has arrived in Moscow overnight for talks on the proposed peace deal. Putin went on in his address to say the ceasefire should lead to lasting peace and remove what he called the root of the crisis. Now, these are the couple of caveats that have been mentioned by Putin in this response that I think should give everyone a moment to pause, because that is what's going to hold up this deal, is his feelings on these issues. Putin also rejected the idea of peacekeepers from NATO and other countries being brought in to monitor the truce. Now, that is something that Australia was involved in talks in, whether that was during the truce or whether that was more afterwards, once a permanent ceasefire has been locked in and it's more about peacekeeping in the region in the months and years afterwards. Remains to be seen. But yeah, he does not want NATO troops anywhere near that region. Now, Trump has responded as well. He is meeting NATO's Secretary General in the White House this morning, our time. And Trump said that Putin put out a very promising statement, but it wasn't complete, and that he's willing to talk to the Russian president to secure the ceasefire.
We know where we are with Ukraine, and we are getting good signals outside of Russia as to where we are with Russia. And hopefully they'll do the right thing.
And these comments all come just as overnight Vladimir Putin actually visited the Kursk region, which is a pretty significant border region in this conflict. A reminder, it was in August last year that Ukraine went into that Russian territory and made some significant territorial gains. Ukraine's been holding that for a while, and that's been a huge bargaining chip in this whole conflict for them. But with Putin's visit and with North Korean troops being flown into that area, Russia's managed to secure about 9/10 of what Ukraine gained at the time. So what's going on there now is that with Russia regaining that territory, that's a big win. Putin's serving it up as a win for himself now. This is huge for him, saying, I'm protecting the motherland, I'm bringing us all back into the fold. And for Ukraine, that's no doubt a little bit stressful, because this was the one thing that could really help them come peace talks. However, the key difference now is that the US is at the table, essentially forcing, Ukraine, and also, from the sounds of it, very lightly and very gently, Russia to the table. That is starkly different to things that we've seen in the last 3 years. This is the first time that we've seen serious negotiations for a ceasefire taking place, which is no doubt filling Ukrainians and also other countries like Poland with a flicker of hope that this conflict could soon come to an end.
Back home now, Australia's ambassador to the US, Kevin Rudd, says negotiations are continuing for a tariff exemption on Aussie aluminium and steel, despite the White House ruling it out.
Team Australia, led by myself as ambassador, have thrown everything at this since 20 January, the day of the inauguration. I probably had a team of 20 government officials working on this. We've had 3 sets of government ministers in town, 2 sets of prime ministerial phone calls, but we're up against an administration which has a very deep-seated view that tariffs are the way to the future. Therefore, their relationship is not going to be a replication of the first Trump administration. It's going to be much harder line. But we don't intend to give up. We're Australian.
So that was the former PM speaking on the ABC last night. And if you're wondering, the three sets of ministers he's referring to include the Foreign Minister Penny Wong, Treasurer Jim Chalmers and Trade Minister Don Farrell, who are all speaking with their US counterparts this week, trying to illustrate just how much effort has gone into trying to secure this exemption. His comments come after he himself sat down for 3 meetings with the US Commerce Secretary this week, who yesterday identified Australia as one of its enemies in trade.
And we're not going to stand for China dumping, Japan dumping. Australia does a lot of aluminum at below cost. I mean, this has got to end, and the president is on it, and he's protecting America.
That was US Secretary Howard Lutnick speaking on Fox there. So, yeah, Kevin Rudd basically saying we've thrown everything at this and we keep coming up against brick walls.
Yeah, and just on what Lutnick said there about Australia doing a lot of aluminium at below cost, there has been no evidence found of that practice just yet. Rudd says his talks with Lutnick have been tough and direct, and that all negotiations have been reminding the US that we are long-standing free trade partners, we impose zero tariffs against American exports, and that the US has a historic trade surplus against us, meaning the US exports more to Australia than it imports, which, were arguments that did circle around 2017, 2018 when they were looking for those exemptions at the time and did win, although Kevin Rudd has conceded that those haven't been effective just yet, but like he mentioned, they're pressing on. When pressed on whether another phone call between Anthony Albanese and Donald Trump could make any difference, he remained doubtful, pointing to the 36 other countries who had negotiated exemptions during the first Trump administration. They've also been unsuccessful this time around, and that includes the UK, whose PM Keir Starmer visited the States earlier this month.
And the Prime Minister has offered some very strong words for an American woman who was filmed snatching a wild baby wombat away from its mum.
And, I suggest to this so-called influencer, maybe she might try some other Australian animals. Take a baby crocodile from its mother and see how you go there. Take another animal that can actually fight back rather than stealing a baby wombat from its mother. See how you go there.
Strong words from the PM. Sam Jones is this woman's name. She could now lose her Australian visa after the video went viral and copped huge backlash, Chris.
Yeah, the footage is awful and shows the mother wombat in distress as the self-proclaimed wildlife biologist and environmental scientist picks up her baby and runs with it, laughing to a man filming.
Just caught a baby wombat. Look at the mother. It's like, it's chasing after her.
I got her baby wombat.
Now she could be kicked out of the country for violating immigration law. In a statement, the Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke said he can't wait to see the back of this individual, confirming her visa is being investigated.
Now, apparently Jones did respond to this, but we can't verify it because her Instagram account has been privated and her TikTok account has been deleted. So she obviously got a lot of backlash to that initial post with this video, and she responded saying she didn't harm the joey, she only held it very briefly. But we don't need to lecture to Australians that you don't go picking up wild animals.
Oh, God.
Honestly, if I saw Sam Jones in the street, she wouldn't like it.
Listen here, briefers. This has really upset our Sacha Barbour Gatt.
Very upset.
Pregnancy aside, this has got nothing to do with heightened pregnancy emotions. This is how deeply you feel about this, hey?
No, it's just so awful. Like this poor mum wombat, she's just freaking out.
Yeah.
And we don't know if they were reunited because she runs away. The mother runs into the bush and then she puts the joey on the floor and then we don't know if they ever get back to each other. And the other point I want to make is that sometimes with wild animals, if humans interact with them, especially when they're babies, the mothers can then reject the babies because they don't have the same smell because then now they've got human smell. So there's all sorts of really bad things that can happen. And like I said, our listeners would know that that is just a dumb thing to do and you would never do that. So I'm not going to start lecturing anyone about why you shouldn't interfere with wild animals. I'll tell a story of a wonderful time I went snorkeling quite recently. I love being in the water. I love the ocean. And it was on my bucket list to see and snorkel with a turtle.
Ooh.
And I did this up at Fitzroy Island in far north Queensland. And it was amazing. And, I was swimming with it, I was following it. And the instinct to want to reach out and touch it was so strong. But I resisted because I'm not an idiot. All right,
Oh,
resist the urge.
I love that it ends in a digestible life lesson for everyone and anyone listening right now.
You know, it's so selfish. It's selfish of humans to want to kind of do that. So yeah, I'll leave it there. Sam Jones, can't wait to see the back of you, just like Tony Burke said. Chris, thank you. Next up, hey, look, we're staying in the ocean actually, and we are going to be talking about, you know, the recent spate of shark attacks that have been happening around Australia and shark bites. We're talking with a scientist about, you know, whether that's a warning to us, whether we should stay out of the water or whether it's all being blown up a bit.
A woman has been attacked by a shark off Gunya Beach.
This bull shark circling the city's canal system.
It was just after midday that a surfer was spotted in distress.
Mauled in chest deep water.
Locals say they've recently seen bull sharks in the area.
Latest victim of a shark attack.
Australia has been rocked by a recent spate of shark bites, tragically including the death of a man in WA, his mauling caught by a drone. We've also seen 2 surfers chased to shore by a 2.5-metre shark at Margaret River, also in WA, while on the east coast, a person was mauled by a suspected bull shark 10 metres from the shore at Bundeena on Sydney's southern outskirts last Friday. This all comes as experts in Queensland issue warnings following ex-tropical cyclone Alfred, with turbulent conditions and increased runoff expected to draw sharks closer to beaches. So, with increasing rhetoric in the media about so-called attacks, should we be worried to head to the beach this weekend? Dr Leonardo Guida is a shark campaign manager at the Australian Marine Conservation Society. Welcome to the briefing, Dr Guida. Look, media reporting is always quick to make it seem like shark attacks are on the rise. Is this latest spate of incidents across the country unusual?
That's the million-dollar question. So I suppose to start with any shark bite, you know, it's important that we have empathy at the centre of any conversation that we have about it, because people are affected, communities are affected, first responders are affected. So my thoughts and condolences go out to all those who do have lived experience with what is a traumatic event. Is what's happened of late unusual? We've had 4 fatal shark bites in just as many months, really, so it's December through to March. Now, shark bites are inherently, believe it or not, random, very rare events. Now, that's not necessarily comforting to anyone who's been involved in a shark bite, but nonetheless, very rare and random events. And human psychology is wired such that with random events, we always want to find patterns and reasons. And as such, by the nature of anything that's random, we can see patterns that might not necessarily be there. So in the case of shark bites, clusters. And a real-life example of this is also in World War II, when you look at V2 rockets being fired by Germany into London. The British thought that the Germans were targeting cities, and they looked at the maps when in fact the Germans had no idea where these rockets were going to land. It's just they saw patterns and they assumed that that's what was happening. But to kind of bring it all back, the reality is that more people are getting bitten by sharks in Australian waters. And the thinking and probably the most logical reason behind that is there's more people by the coast, there's more people entering the water. Water-based activities are increasing in popularity, whether that be surfing or diving. And in addition to that, we've had some of the hottest years on records. More people are going to the beach to cool off. More people are in the water. The chances of something like this happening is going to possibly increase, albeit at a very small amount. If we look further and look at fatalities, I recently just had a look at the shark incident database file that Australia keeps a record of all the shark bites. And in the past 10 years versus the previous 10 years, there's been a very, very, very slight uptick in the number of fatalities, so averaged over 10 years. And it's averaged over 10 years because, as I said, there's so much variability year to year and it's so random. And another thing that is going to affect, I suppose, the risk of a shark bite is our oceans warming and climate change. And that's because we do know and we are seeing sharks moving into different areas for different periods of time, perhaps in areas they weren't normally in previously. And these areas just may happen to overlap with beaches that people find quite popular and attend frequently. So there could be 1,000,001 reasons, but I think, to put it simply, we're seeing an increase in shark bites because there's more people in the water, our population's growing, and things are getting hotter and people want to cool off.
These incidents, a couple of the really high-profile one from the last week, the one in Esperance, tragically, Melbourne surfer Stephen Payne died. And, you know, the hopes of finding his body are very, very slim after he was bitten while surfing. There was also a person who was mauled at Bundeena in Sydney. Now, both of these incidents, interestingly, happened in relatively shallow water. Now, I think most swimmers who might be nervous about sharks when they go to the beach go, well, I'll just paddle, keep it up to my waist and I should be okay. The deeper water must be the more dangerous kind of area to swim. So how rare is that for these attacks to happen in such shallow water?
The reality is that sharks occupy all depths of the ocean. You can find some of your smaller sharks and rays, like your Port Jackson sharks, in water that's only 2 metres deep. And then you can go to water that's over 1 kilometre deep, and you're finding sharks like the green-eyed spur dog, which has these bright green eyes to help us see near pitch black depths. So depth isn't a factor as such. The reality is that the ocean is their home and they occupy all parts of the water column. But I suppose the point is that if ever someone was to go to the beach and depth was a concern, instinctively stick closer to the shallows, perhaps in areas where you can see relatively well what's going on. But more importantly, if you're going to beaches, particularly where you're not familiar with, ask the locals. And in the case of New South Wales and WA, there are shark smart apps which kind of give you an indication in real time as to what sharks have been seen where and at what beaches.
Yeah, I actually get those alerts weirdly on Facebook a lot. I've never clicked on the page, but I keep getting told everywhere there's a shark in Sydney. So I'm very aware of what beaches have had alerts recently.
Yeah, and again, that's the thing. Like, they are everywhere, and that's amazing because we only ever really hear of a shark incident when something goes wrong. But you never hear of the hundreds, if not thousands of times when nothing happens.
Yeah.
You can see sharks nearby people surfing and grey nurses, and on the odd occasion maybe a white shark. So more often than not, a shark has probably seen you and not absolutely cared in the world and just done its thing and you've done your thing. But yes, tragically, there are those cases where, as we've seen, a shark, for one reason or another, does bite a human, and it can unfortunately result in a fatality.
Something interesting that's also happening is up in Queensland in the wake of ex-tropical cyclone Alfred is this warning that sharks are going to be drawn to shore because of certain factors following the storm. Tell us about that.
Sharks will follow environmental conditions, whether it's temperature, prey migrations, and in the case of bull sharks, rainfall. So it's well known that bull sharks, their presence spikes in and around estuaries and river mouths that lead to the ocean, particularly during and after heavy rainfall. So in Queensland at the moment, you'll have probably for a good, I would say, maybe a couple of weeks, these rivers and this lag of all that rainfall coming out into the ocean and warm water temperatures. Bull sharks love temperatures that are kind of in their mid-20s in the water. So you've got warm water temperatures, quite a lot of runoff. You know, there's been a lot of heavy rain, as we're all aware of. And it's quite possible that these are conditions that are conducive to a lot of bull sharks being in and around river mouths. So, yes, I would be a lot more cautious of being in and around river mouths at this particular time.
I'm curious to know how you feel about the language that's used in media reporting about shark attacks, shark bites, shark incidents. You know, the language around an attack, for example, kind of suggests it's on purpose. And you've made a great point that the people who are directly impacted by these might feel a different way to how someone who's never, ever going to experience that might feel. But I'm curious to know, as someone who works in marine conservation, how do you feel about the language around attacks?
Me being a scientist, I want to communicate what is happening most accurately. And for me to do so, it means my language has to reflect what the incident most likely was in terms of animal behaviour. So in that instance, I usually say bite because more often than not, at least what we know from the science is that sharks will bite out of curiosity. And unfortunately, they don't have hands. They've got a mouthful of razor blades. And so when that happens to us, it can have some devastating outcomes. There is, in the very, very rare instance, where a shark will bite someone with the intention of consumption, so eating them. First of all, it's very rare to be bitten by a shark in the first place. Rarer still for the behaviour to actually reflect consumption. In that instance there, it's very difficult to tell because you need anecdotal reports of people who witnessed it, or as we're seeing now with drone footage, unfortunately, sometimes drone footage does capture these incidences, and you can kind of assess the situation there. Then the question becomes, okay, well, what word do you use in this instance here? And look, you can call it a predatory strike. I'd prefer to do that only because I don't want to play into this idea that the sole behaviour of a shark is to go out there, kill and eat.
No, that's totally fair. I'm curious then as well how you feel about mitigation measures, because a lot of people feel safer knowing that they're swimming at a beach with a shark net, or that there's smart drum lines out in the water, or that, they do the search for the shark after there has been a fatal incident or a bite or a mauling. What's your position on the way that the government is trying to handle interactions between humans and sharks in the water in Australia?
Look, it has to be a comprehensive approach. There's no silver bullet that's going to say this will protect you from a shark bite. You will never have 100% protection at the beach. It's just impossible. So what we need to do is we need to mitigate it as much as possible with a comprehensive approach as possible that is evidence-based. So by that I mean we use drone surveillance. We use the tagging and tracking of sharks. We use community-based and even community-tailored, for example, education programs. So in Esperance, as far as I'm aware of, they've got tagging and tracking, they've got beach alerts, and if I'm not mistaken, I think even first aid kits at the beach. And then they've got that at a few WA beaches. So you need that evidence-based comprehensive approach. And it's also, with each approach, it's a bit like Swiss cheese. If you take one approach, it's going to have quite a few holes in it, or quite a few flaws. But with each successive approach and each successive measure, if you put that on top of another slice, on top of another slice, each individual slice may have its holes or flaws, but together you're covering those holes or flaws, and it's becoming, a lot more solid. But when we look at lethal control measures like your traditional drum lines that are a baited fishing hook and the shark nets that exist in New South Wales and Queensland, they're fishing devices. They're designed to catch and kill. And the reality is, and we know based on the evidence, that there's no, in New South Wales, for example, there's no difference between the number of shark bites at a netted beach or an unnetted beach. And in fact, there's been 30-odd bites at netted beaches anyway. We also know that from another study that with shark nets, they were found to have caught 40% of the sharks on the beach side of a net. So this is once the sharks have actually come in close and then gone, okay, I'm going to head back out now. Whereas again, if you use drones, for example, there's also that added benefit of spotting people who are struggling to swim. And that is the biggest killer at Australian beaches, drowning. And with the tagging of tracking sharks, particularly with the advances of AI, with the data that we collect and the environmental data that we collect, we may even get to a point where, because of the data and the models that we've got, we can start predicting where sharks are going to be and for how long before they even get there. But, and I'm pretty confident in saying this, I think most Aussies realise that the ocean is ultimately not our place. And anyone who does go to the ocean does take risks. The important thing is being fully informed and taking risks that you're willing to take.
Well, that might lead us into our final question, Dr. Guida, which is, it's going to be hot in a lot of parts of Australia this weekend. Lots of people heading to the beach. As you said, it's what we're seeing more and more of, especially with climate change. What's your advice to beachgoers as they hit the water this weekend? Should they be worried? What can they do? And how can they enjoy themselves at the beach when maybe this is playing in the back of their mind?
Yeah, do what you do. Honestly, there's no real need to worry. The beach is no different today or tomorrow as it was last time you went or a year ago as such. However, if you are listening to this, there are some simple things, and that is, if you're going to a patrol beach, swim between the flags. Speak to the lifeguards, see what they've seen. Ask them, say, look, are there particular dangerous parts of this beach? Because again, the biggest threat to you at the beach are the ocean conditions, not so much the animals. In addition to that, if you're going to some of the more remote beaches and you are worried or you are concerned, again, go to the local tackle shop or the local milk bar, just ask them, say, hey, never been here before. Is it okay to swim here? There's the classic dawn and dusk, avoid swimming at those times there. And if you're at the beach and for some reason you see a lot of birds dipping into the water in any particular area, and it seems like they're diving a lot, generally that's birds feeding on a bait ball. Bait balls, sharks tend to like bait balls because smaller fish means food, smaller fish bring bigger fish. So if you do see those kind of behaviours, it might be best to kind of just step back a bit. But generally speaking, enjoy the beach as you normally would. It's an incredibly rare incident if it were to occur. But again, dawn and dusk, speak to locals, speak to lifesavers, swim between the flags. And if you see little things like birds dipping into the water, or quite a lot of them, that might be indicative of bait ball, and you may want to just kind of sit back for a bit.
Dr. Leonardo Guida, thank you so much for joining us today and for providing us with some very important information about sharks at a time when I think they're probably on a lot of people's mind.
No worries. Thanks, heaps. Appreciate it.
That was Dr Leonardo Guida, a shark expert at the Australian Marine Conservation Society, speaking with me there. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That is it for now. We appreciate your company this week, and of course we'll be back as always next week. Before you go, I would absolutely love it if you could share this ep with someone who you think might get something out of it. It is a really easy way you can support us and all we do here at The Briefing. And over the weekend, why not go check us out on socials if you haven't already? We're on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. You can see video footage from behind the scenes of our interviews. We also put that up on TikTok and on YouTube. Search Listener Newsroom. I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. See you next week.
Listener.